2021 and 2023, housing prices in parts of the Phoenix metropolitan area continued to rise, while developers lost access to guaranteed water supplies, not in spite of it, not before anyone knew. During the exact period when new construction permits were being denied due to insufficient groundwater, home values in surrounding areas climbed. The contradiction wasn't hidden in footnotes or technical reports. It was openly discussed in city council meetings, covered in local news, visible in county records, and the market responded by becoming more expensive. This isn't a story about a crash that didn't happen yet. It's about a place where the thing that makes human habitation possible started disappearing, and prices went up anyway. Phoenix became more valuable as it became less viable. The mechanism behind this wasn't complicated. It just required ignoring something that hadn't broken completely yet. The pattern reveals something about how markets process risk when consequences remain theoretical. A resource can become scarce, regulations can acknowledge that scarcity, development can be restricted, and prices can still rise because the constraint hasn't translated into immediate uninhabitability. Water still flows from taps in existing homes. The infrastructure built over decades continues functioning. The question isn't whether Phoenix is livable today. It clearly is. The question is what happens when a city's growth trajectory collides with physical limits, and the market decides that the collision point is still far enough away to ignore. Phoenix exists in the Sonoran Desert, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and annual rainfall averages 7 inches. Nothing about the landscape suggests dense human settlement. The city became habitable through infrastructure, not geography. Canals carried water from the Colorado River. Wells pulled from aquifers formed over millennia. Air conditioning turned interior spaces into controlled environments disconnected from the air outside. Grass grew in suburban yards. Lakes appeared in planned communities. The entire metropolitan area functioned as an engineered environment laid over terrain that would otherwise support scattered creosote bushes and occasional saguaro cacti. Growth happened in rings. The urban core expanded outward in every direction. Each decade added new suburbs farther from the center. Streets appeared in grids across empty land. Houses followed, then schools, shopping centers, more houses. The pattern repeated until development reached the edges of federal land or mountain preserves. By 2020, the Phoenix metro area covered more than 14,000 square miles and held nearly 5 million people. Most of that growth occurred in the outer suburbs, where land was cheaper and construction could happen quickly. These weren't neighborhoods that evolved over generations. They were built in bursts, entire communities appearing within 2 or 3 years. The desert didn't become temperate. The average annual rainfall didn't increase. The natural environment remained exactly what it had always been: arid, extreme, hostile to the kind of settlement patterns that defined American suburban development. What changed was the capacity to override those conditions through engineering and resource extraction. The Colorado River, which flows through 7 states and Mexico, provided surface water through a complex system of dams, canals, and allocation agreements established in the early 20th century. The Central Arizona Project, completed in the 1990s, carried that water uphill across 336 miles to reach Phoenix and Tucson. Underground, the aquifers held water deposited over geological time. Wells could access it wherever drilling reached deep enough. For decades, both sources seemed adequate. The river kept flowing, the aquifers kept producing. Growth accelerated. By 2010, Phoenix was one of the fastest-growing metropolitan areas in the country. Developers could buy large parcels, install infrastructure, and build hundreds of homes in coordinated phases. The model worked because land was available, demand was strong, and resources appeared unlimited. The physical environment became an abstraction, something managed by utilities in municipal systems. Residents experienced Phoenix as a place with reliable water, consistent electricity, and indoor temperatures controlled year-round. The desert existed as scenery, visible through windows, but not directly encountered except by choice. Arizona's groundwater had been depleted faster than it recharged for decades, but regulation lagged behind usage. Wells drilled in the 1950s and 60s pulled from aquifers that took thousands of years to fill. The water level dropped steadily. In some areas outside municipal boundaries, residential wells that once hit water at 200 feet had to be drilled to 600 feet or deeper. In 1980, the state passed the Groundwater Management Act, which required new developments in certain areas to prove they had a 100-year assured water supply before receiving construction approval. The law applied to active management areas, zones where groundwater depletion had become severe. It didn't ban growth, it just required proof of access. For years, developers met this standard by securing rights to Colorado River water or drilling deeper wells in areas not yet classified as depleted. The system worked as long as both sources remained available. In June 2023, the Arizona Department of Water Resources stopped approving new developments in parts of the Phoenix active management area that relied on groundwater. Not because of a sudden crisis, because modeling showed the aquifer couldn't support another century of withdrawals at projected rates. The analysis incorporated population growth projections, existing water rights, recharge rates, and climate data. The conclusion was technical and unavoidable. The math didn't work for new developments claiming groundwater as their assured supply. Thousands of planned homes lost their water certification. Projects already underway could continue. New applications were frozen. The announcement affected specific developments in areas like Buckeye and Queen Creek, suburbs on the metropolitan edge where growth had been accelerating. These weren't fringe parcels. They were planned communities with infrastructure already in place or under construction, master-planned developments with names and marketing materials and model homes. Some had already sold lots in early phases. Others had broken ground on roads and utilities. The water limitation stopped them mid-process, creating a landscape of partial development where streets existed but houses didn't, where signage advertised communities that couldn't be completed. The limitation didn't come from drought or failed wells or immediate shortage. It came from a regulatory body looking 100 years forward and determining the math didn't work. That distinction matters. The water was still there in the aquifer, still accessible through drilling. The restriction was predictive, based on modeling future depletion. It represented a policy decision to limit growth now to prevent uninhabitability later. Whether that timeline was accurate, whether the models accounted for all variables, whether technology or climate or consumption patterns might change the equation, none of that altered the immediate effect. New construction in those areas stopped or relocated. Housing construction in Phoenix didn't stop, it shifted. Developers moved to areas still classified as having adequate water supplies, or focused on infill projects within city limits where municipal water systems provided coverage. New subdivisions appeared in adjacent counties. Homes kept being built, just not everywhere they had been planned. Listings in Queen Creek, one of the towns most affected by the groundwater restrictions, showed active sales throughout 2023 and into 2024. Streets that had been graded but not yet built out remained visible on satellite maps, dirt roads extending into undeveloped land. Real estate websites showed properties for sale in developments where future phases had been canceled or delayed due to water limits. The existing homes still transacted, buyers still made offers, financing still went through. The physical landscape showed the contradiction more clearly than the market data did. Satellite imagery captured neighborhoods at various stages of completion. In some areas, homes lined every street in neat rows. A mile away, streets existed with no houses, just graded lots and installed utility lines waiting for construction that had been put on hold. Further out, land remained entirely undeveloped despite being zoned for residential use. Residents living in finished sections existed next to empty parcels that would have been their neighbors' homes if permitting had continued. For people living there, daily life continued normally. The infrastructure assumed future density. The regulations now limited it. Median home prices in the Phoenix metro area rose from approximately $410,000 in early 2022 to over $430,000 by mid-2023, the same period when groundwater restrictions were implemented. Prices in Queen Creek followed a similar trajectory. Homes that sold for $380,000 in 2021 were selling for $420,000 or more in 2023. The pattern held in Buckeye, another suburb where thousands of planned homes lost water approval. Prices didn't collapse, they didn't stall. They continued the upward trend established before the announcement. Inventory remained relatively tight. Demand still exceeded supply in most price ranges. Buyers competed for available homes. The factors that had been driving prices upward, population growth, limited inventory, migration for more expensive markets, remained in effect. The water issue introduced a constraint on future supply, which in some interpretations made existing homes more valuable, not less. If fewer new homes could be built, the ones already standing gained scarcity value. This logic appeared in real estate analyses. It wasn't illogical. It just operated on a different time frame than the one water regulation was addressing. The market priced homes based on current utility and near-term expectations, not century-long sustainability projections. A house in Queen Creek in 2023 had water service, connected to municipal systems that continued operating normally. The fact that new houses couldn't be built nearby due to groundwater modeling didn't affect whether the existing house could be lived in today or next year. Some buyers researched water availability before purchasing. They asked about well depths, municipal connections, aquifer levels, future development restrictions. They read the groundwater reports. They factored in the possibility that water access might change. Others didn't. Not because they were uninformed, but because the information didn't alter the decision. If you're buying a home to live in for 5 or 10 years, and water is currently flowing from the tap, and the mortgage payment works with your income, the question becomes whether you believe the system will hold for the duration you plan to stay. For many buyers, it did. Municipal water systems weren't failing. Taps worked. Showers ran. The risk was long-term, infrastructural, systemic. It wasn't immediate. The difference between immediate risk and long-term risk creates different decision frameworks. If a house has foundation damage, that's immediate. It affects livability now. If a house is in a region where water might become scarce in 20 or 30 years, that's long-term. It might affect resale value eventually. The uncertainty is real, but it doesn't prevent the house from functioning today. Most residential real estate transactions operate on medium-term horizons. Buyers plan to stay 5 to 15 years on average. The market price is based on those timelines. Within that framework, long-term regional water sustainability becomes one factor among many, and not necessarily the determining one. Appraisals used comparable sales, which showed rising values regardless of water concerns. Lenders approved mortgages based on current conditions and standard risk models that didn't incorporate long-term aquifer depletion. The institutional mechanisms that facilitate home purchases weren't designed to price in century-long sustainability questions. They were designed to assess whether the borrower could make payments and whether the property had sufficient value to serve as collateral. Both assessments remained positive. Investors buying rental properties sometimes calculated differently. Some avoided areas with water uncertainty. Others sighed as manageable risk within a 5 or 7 year hold period. The rental market remained strong. Population growth continued. People still needed places to live. Demand for rentals didn't decrease because of aquifer projections. If anything, the limitation on new construction potentially tightened rental supply, which could support higher rents. The calculus wasn't about whether Phoenix would exist in 2100. It was about whether rent could cover the mortgage in 2025, whether occupancy rates would stay high, whether property values would hold over a medium-term investment horizon. For those questions, the water issue registered as a variable to monitor, not a reason to exit the market entirely. Phoenix continues to function. Water runs through pipes. People move in. Housing developments fill. The outer suburbs remain inhabited, expensive and dependent on systems that are visibly straining. The Colorado River operates under shortage declarations. Lake Mead sits at historically low levels. Groundwater restrictions remain in place. And housing prices, as of late 2024, have stabilized at levels higher than they were before any of this became regulatory policy. The contradiction hasn't resolved. It's just become part of the operating conditions. Growth has slowed in some areas and shifted to others. Developers work within the new constraints. Municipalities implement conservation measures. Residents install drought-tolerant landscaping, comply with watering restrictions. The adjustments happen incrementally. Buyers continue purchasing. The market doesn't wait for long-term sustainability to be guaranteed. It prices based on current access and near-term expectations. Phoenix is expensive because people want to live there, and housing supply is limited. It has uncertain water access because the desert can't support unlimited extraction, and climate patterns are changing. Both things are true simultaneously. The city exists in the gap between what works now and what the models say won't work later. That gap hasn't closed yet. It's just narrower than it was. Houses still sell. Prices still reflect demand. And somewhere beneath the foundations, the aquifer continues draining at a rate that exceeds replenishment. The water level drops incrementally each year. The change is measurable, but gradual enough that it doesn't trigger crisis response, just ongoing adjustment. Phoenix remains livable. It remains expensive. And it remains dependent on something that is, measurably and without ambiguity, disappearing.